Hi, I'm Ellen from Outside Xtra, and I'm here to tell you Ubisoft is making a huge mistake by letting Prince of Persia wither on the vine. But also, and more importantly, back in July 2022, Ubisoft announced that it would be closing servers for all of the games currently on screen. If you're watching this video before the 1st of September, Ubisoft are just about to shut down those servers. If you're watching it after, bad news, they're already gone. Sadly, this isn't an isolated case. Gaming history is littered with games that required servers to run, that publishers have ceased to support and hence are now unplayable. It doesn't matter if you own the disc, these games, in whole or in part, are gone for good. Or should I say for bad? I'm here to tell you why this obviously sucks and why Ubisoft is making a terrible mistake. So buckle up. With these server closures, I'm personally most upset by the loss of 3 iterations of Assassin's Creed multiplayer, which were so much better than they had any right to be. I immediately fell in love with the way multiplayer worked in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, which was, at its core, hide and seek with murder. In Assassin's Creed multiplayer, you had to trick your fellow players into thinking you were but a mere NPC, so that you could hunt down your targets and avoid other players hunting you. The kind of social deduction that has never been more appealing in a post-Among Us world.
First blood.
There were lots of different modes, but the main rule was, the sneakier your kill, the higher your points. It was often slow and methodical, but in a tense, fun, nail-biting cat-and-mouse way. You were forced to get up close and personal, which meant that new players didn't just get sniped from across the map. All in all, it was the perfect multiplayer for people who didn't usually like multiplayer. You were thrown into an area with a bunch of other players and a fun selection of special assassin-y abilities, not just for killing, but also to defend yourself. I can tell you that there's no better feeling than someone killing your body double and then you immediately stunning them in their stupid, confused face. At this point you're probably thinking, damn, Assassin's Creed multiplayer sounds fun as hell. Well, guess what? You cannot play it and never will be able to, and neither will I or anyone. My point is, when publishers shut down servers, great game experiences are lost to time. For example, no one will ever again discover for themselves what an unexpected treat those Assassin's Creed multiplayers were. I want to make a point here that players aren't the only ones losing out. Ubisoft is shooting itself in the foot. Ubisoft says that closing the online services for some older games allows us to focus our resources on delivering great experiences for players who are playing newer or more popular titles. But not only is Ubi losing fan goodwill by closing down these games, it's also missing an important point. These games are unpopular because Ubisoft made them that way even when these games were fairly new. Now bear with me as I take you back to September 2013. Before I joined the gaming industry, my first ever gameplay videos uploaded onto this video sharing platform were of Assassin's Creed multiplayer, because I loved it and I wanted to share that love with anyone foolish enough to let me start talking about them. And here's that guy I want to kill. Yeah! However, the first video I made, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, was a bit of a dud. Not because it was bad gameplay, but because it had no gameplay. I literally couldn't get into a multiplayer game. This was 4 years after the release of Brotherhood, and critically, 2 sequels had launched in the meantime. I just want to play.
Searching for other Abstergo agents.
Evidently, Ubisoft had a pretty intense release schedule for Assassin's Creed at this point. By September 2013, Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed 3 had come out, siphoning the player base away from earlier games, and Edward Kenway was already on the horizon in a big old pirate ship, ready for the release of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. 4 games in 4 years spread the player base pretty thin. Then along came Assassin's Creed Rogue and Assassin's Creed Unity, which brought the guillotine blade down on multiplayer altogether. Ubisoft decided that players wanted something else now, so Ubisoft abandoned the original Assassin's Creed multiplayer in favour of Unity's entirely different co-op mode. This co-op mode amounted to a character choice of one guy in 4 different colour outfits. A huge downgrade from the variety of characters and gameplay modes from the older abandoned multiplayer. By pursuing the co-op trend, Ubisoft neglected the promising and original multiplayer offering it already had. So multiplayer was left to wither as Ubisoft marched on with new plans for Assassin's Creed, and continued to forget about multiplayer in Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla. Ubisoft moved on, but in order for multiplayer games not to become obsolete, the people that make them need to support them and not constantly replace them or axe them. Ubisoft can provably keep multiplayers alive. Rainbow Six Siege still has a solid player base 7 years after its release, because instead of making it obsolete with yearly new Rainbow Six releases, Ubisoft constantly monitors and updates the game to keep players engaged and happy. I went to Ubisoft Montreal and saw Rainbow Six Siege had its own developer hub that looks like something from the floor of the London Stock Exchange. And before you go, oh, but that's a newer game. It's only 2 years older than Black Flag, and older multiplayer titles like Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2 are still going strong because their companies looked after them. I worry that by shutting down servers on games it sees as unpopular, Ubisoft thinks it's just following trends like it did when it first stopped making them, when actually Ubi created that trend. It's finishing off the games it had already started to kill all those years ago. Ubisoft is not fixing a problem, they were the problem, and Ubi and the players all lose out on an excellent part of its portfolio because of its mistakes.
Massacre.
It might be too late for these games because the decision has already been made, but it's not too late for whatever Ubisoft publishes next. Just saying that Assassin's Creed multiplayer as an esport would have been amazing if Ubi had bothered to look after it. Now, Assassin's Creed multiplayer might be what I'm still holding a candle for and won't shut up about, but I just want to remind you that many series are going to be hobbled by this shutdown. Ubisoft says to PC users of games such as Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands and Splinter Cell Blacklist that you will be unable to play multiplayer, link Ubisoft accounts in-game, or use online features. And for games like Far Cry 3, Driver San Francisco and Ghost Recon Future Soldier, this stretches to the console versions too. It's sad to see certain multiplayer and presumably online co-op features being lost, but at least you can still play the single-player adventures of these, right? I said you can still play the single-player adventures of these, right? Well, take a closer look at Ghost Recon Future Soldier's decommissioning notes, and you'll also see that Ubisoft states, to play the solo campaign, you will have to set your console into offline mode. Yep, you heard correctly. In order to play Ghost Recon Future Soldier, a game set in 2024, you have to hide the fact that you're playing it in 2022. This is most likely due to digital rights management, or DRM, tools used by developers in an attempt to fight piracy. As you probably have experienced, DRM often ends up making life harder for legitimate purchasers of the product. Fortunately, Ghost Recon Future Soldier's DRM isn't always online, else fans would be really screwed. But now you'll have to remember to go through the system settings rigmarole of disconnecting your console from the internet if you want to play a game set 2 years in the future. Folks, I'm just gonna say it. What if the internet is bad? Some folks watching might think, well, it's understandable that these games are getting closed down. They're really old, and I mean, sure, if something from 2013 counts as really old to you, in which case I'm just gonna go over there and crumble into a small pile of dust. Most of these games came out between 2010 and 2013. In gaming terms, that isn't that long ago. Heck, many of these games were covered by our sister channel Outside Xbox when they first started out. This Splinter Cell Blacklist multiplayer gameplay was filmed at a preview event by our very own Jane Douglas in 2013. It wasn't that long ago, folks!
All terminals are online and ready for hacking.
Plus, one multiplayer-only game that will become unplayable is multiplayer VR arcade game Space Junkies, which by all accounts is a pretty good game and came out in 2019, for God's sake. Game makers like Ubisoft seem desperate for players to adopt VR, but this sends the message to those who've invested in a headset that any online elements of a Ubisoft VR game they're interested in might not work 3 years after they buy it. Speaking of shutdown multiplayer Ubisoft games, lest we forget Hyperscape. Hyperscape? Do you remember Hyperscape? Okay, you probably already forgot it. Ubisoft's Battle Royale game whose release was completely overshadowed by its employees rightly calling out a toxic work culture at various Ubisoft studios. Hyperscape's release went with a fizz rather than a bang, and servers were shut down on 28th of April 2022, less than 2 years after its release. While most people clearly aren't mourning it, it is a worrying precedent, and a real shame for people who enjoyed it and maybe hoped a couple of servers could stay up for the fans. Basically, if you like a multiplayer game, you'll only get to play it as long as enough other people are interested in it, no matter how new it is. Once enough players leave, companies don't feel it's worth the money to keep the lights on for the handful of people that stick around. So for players, where's the incentive to try new games? You might as well just give in and play Fortnite like everyone else. That's not going to get shut down. You might not give a crap about multiplayer games. Well, old buddy, old pal, it ain't just multiplayer games we're losing with this shutdown, especially if you're a PC gamer. As well as losing online support for multiplayer for the PC versions of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Liberation, Ubisoft says, and I quote, "The installation and access to DLC will be unavailable." And yes, that means that even if you have already paid for it and downloaded it onto your PC, you cannot access it. It's gone. Forever. The console versions seem to be unaffected. For example, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood players on Xbox or PlayStation consoles will still be able to play the Da Vinci Disappearance, presumably because they're stored on Microsoft or Sony servers, although Ubisoft hasn't explained this in any satisfactory way on their whatever you call this. We're going with Matrix of Game Death. What we know for sure is that in addition to those games, Driver San Francisco, Far Cry 3, Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands, and Submarine Sim Silent Hunter 5 all lose DLC on PC from the 1st of September 2022. PC customers probably didn't know their purchases would have an expiry date of the 1st of September 2022, but, well, they do. Sorry. Especially if this video is how you found out, because it's a bit late to tell you now because you can't really do anything about it, so oops. This video might seem like all is lost, but PC players can avoid losing their Assassin's Creed DLC. How do you ask? Why, by buying the remasters, of course. In general, I'm a fan of remasters and re-releases. By bringing the game to new consoles, they reach players who may have missed the first release and don't have the old consoles to play them on. So you get a whole new group of people to talk to about Ezio's good hair. Beautiful. However, there is another side to this trend of giving old games a fresh coat of paint. Increasingly, when a remaster arrives, its original, if still available, is removed from digital storefronts. This happened with games such as Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning, the GTA Definitive Collection, and Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. This turns the remaster into less a tool of preservation for games that aren't easily available, and more into a tool of replacement of a game that was not long released. A replacement that also comes with a higher price tag. Plus, the remasters and remakes don't always have everything that was previously included. For example, in Ubisoft's releases, while Assassin's Creed the Ezio Collection and AC3 Remastered had all the DLC, they did not include their respective multiplayers. So good that they won't lose their DLC, but bad that they'll never get to do this to a total stranger on the internet. God, that's so satisfying. Why are they closing this game? Sorry, to get back on point. I don't want to have to rely on remakes and remasters to play old games. I think remasters play an important role in making games accessible, but they shouldn't just be another way to get cash out of the fanbase, and they're certainly not a replacement for the original. Although, saying that, Ubisoft, if you'd put together all the multiplayer maps from Brotherhood and Revelations into a special Ezio collection, I would have thrown all of my money at you in the hopes that it would re-spark interest. Please, I just want to stab people in the Renaissance. Yeah, like that. So what else do these closures mean for games going forward? Well, first off, it makes it clear to us punters that we're not entitled to the games that we buy, especially ones we acquire digitally, like with downloadable content. I have my fingers crossed that most of the other Ubisoft Online features that gradually get lost over time will mostly be pointless things like old microtransaction systems that we never wanted in the first place. But as we can see happening now, server closures erase brilliant titles that cannot be replaced, and it's easy to imagine how this precedent could affect games in the future. Say you like playing Sea of Thieves now, will you still be playing it in 10 years? Maybe not, but you'd like the option, right? For fans of these games, it's a real shame, and for Ubisoft, well, they're throwing away the hard work of their developers. With Assassin's Creed Black Flag's multiplayer being left up and the other closures being in the news, it's my hope that this 4th multiplayer in the series might get a resurgence in players. Hey, maybe we could end up on the same server and bump into each other! With knives! And raise a virtual glass of pirate grog to the multiplayer modes that came before and will never be played again. Thanks to Ubisoft. The bastards. So those are just some of the reasons why shutting down all of those servers is a bad idea, and why you should play Assassin's Creed multiplayer as well. Did you play any of those games? Do you still play them? Are you going to miss them? Are you affected by any of the other server closures that have happened over the years? Have you already lost access to a game that you love so much? Well, let us know in the comments below, and if you liked this video and you want to see more videos like it, then give us a thumbs up and subscribe to get way more stuff like this in future. We do loads of other videos and they're all quite interesting, hopefully. But in the meantime, take care of yourself, and maybe I'll stab you all up in Black Flag. That'd be fun. Bye!